Benjamin, troop morale is at an all-time low. Even the Klingons are starting to wonder if we can defeat the Dominion. We need a big win, and we need it now. I couldn't agree more, which is why I have just proposed a plan to Starfleet. Oh really? And what plan is that? I'm going to retake Deep Space Nine. Just look to your left, there was this big screen with a strategic plan and a giant picture of Deep Space Nine in the middle of that plan. What'd you think I was gonna do? Invade Vulcan? Come on, Dax, you're not very observant, are you? Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Favor the Bold, which is episode 5 of season 6 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll is Favor the Bold. So Favor the Bold is I would say maybe part 5 of the Deep Space Nine Dominion Cardassian takeover story arc. This is the penultimate episode of that story arc, in which we get Sisko planning to retake Deep Space Nine, and Kira and Quark trying to deal with Rom's impending execution and trying to avert it to no avail, and Odo trying to apologize to Kira to no avail. Meanwhile, Sisko finds that he gets news that the minefield on the wormhole is about to be taken down, so that they have no time to wait for the Klingons and other allies, and they must go immediately, where they find a Dominion Cardassian fleet that is twice the size of theirs. Then cut the black cliffhanger, dun dun dun. So, Favor the Bold and Sacrifice of Angels pretty much make a two-parter. Now, really, if I was going to be consistent, I probably would have reviewed Favor the Bold and Sacrifice of Angels as one episode, because that's what I usually do with two-parters, even if they have different titles, like Improbable Cause and the Dice Cast, or the one in the 5th season was that In Purgatory's Shadow and Bioferno's Light. But I don't know, this one's a bit more tricky because they're all part of a larger story arc. Started with Call to Arms and at the season 5 finale, and then the first 6 episodes of season 6 all make up like actually 7 episodes if you include Call to Arms. It all make up like a 7-episode story arc about Deep Space Nine being occupied and taken over by the Dominion and Cardassian Alliance. So that makes it a bit more tricky for me, because if I include Favor the Bold and Sacrifice of Angel as one episode, then would I have to include all 7 episodes as one episode? And I have seen people who do that, who like include all 7 episodes and like put it in their top 10 and say all 7 of these are my favorite episode, which I wouldn't do, because that 7 episodes unfortunately features a bad episode, Sons and Daughters, and a couple of like okay episodes like A Time to Stand and even Call to Arms, I would say, were just moderately good. But the story arc overall was amazing. As I said, I think this is definitely one of the high points for the Star Trek franchise as a whole. It was a huge risk for Deep Space Nine at the time to do serialized storytelling, and apparently, I just found this out, the creators, the showrunners wanted to do more serialized and wanted the whole season. In fact, that's what I said. How come there was only 6 episodes story arc? They should have did it for the whole season. But apparently, good old Rick Berman and the studio heads at Paramount were fighting against this and wouldn't let them do entirely serialized. But they got away with what they got away with, and what they did was quite amazing. It was a milestone, and yeah, those stupid studio execs were actually holding the show back from being even more groundbreaking and cutting edge than they could have been, but it was still great. Now, getting into Favor the Bold in particular, so this is basically the first half of the story that's completed in Sacrifice of Angels, but I have already done a review of Sacrifice of Angels on my channel, which you can look forward to check out. Which I actually love Sacrifice of Angels. I think this, I would put that in my top 10 of Deep Space Nine episodes. I think that episode is amazing, and I think it gets a bit, maybe it gets a bit more flack than it deserves because of that whole Deus Machina thing, which I totally disagree with, but you can watch my video on that episode to hear me get into that. Favor the Bold, it's hard to say that, I mean, again, if I count this as a two-parter, then I could put it with Sacrifice of Angel in my top 10. But if I'm looking at it by itself, I love this episode. I think it does everything right. It does everything that it needs to do, and it does it amazingly well. A lot of great character moments, but it's kind of an incomplete story, so I don't feel right putting this episode in my top 10 or top 20, because really it's just setting up for Sacrifice of Angels. So we do get some great scenes, some great character interactions in this episode, though, so let me start to delve into some of the specifics here. So first of all, a lot of this is the episode, we find out that Rom is slated to be executed, because at the end of the previous episode, Rom, and I love the continuity here, again, it's amazing the way they did the serialized storytelling. But anyway, at the end of the last episode, Rom and Kira and a few others conspired to sabotage Damar's weapon or whatever that would destroy the minefield, and Oda was supposed to disable the security sensor so they could get away with it, but he was too busy, doing some lovey-dovey stuff with the female changeling and being distracted, that he didn't do that, and Rom got caught. And so they not only did they not complete the sabotage, Rom also got to complete, is being held and executed, and Kira goes to Wayne, is like, can you let him go? And he's like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I let a man go and then execute him a couple of days later? Which it was a cool scene. I kind of like that. And I do think that Kira was being really obtuse, actually thinking that the Dominion would just let Rom go. And she tries to play her, Bajoran, because the Dominion wanted to have an alliance with Bajor, so she tries to play that card. Oh, I'll get the Bajoran government to protest, and Wayne's like, yeah, well, go right ahead. Their complaints will fall on deaf ears because we take a very dim view of saboteurs in the Dominion. And that's, I wouldn't say I agree with the Dominion's policy, but it's in character for the Dominion. So it's kind of obtuse and stupid of Kira to actually expect, because Wayne's reaction here is pretty much exactly how I think it should be. It's like totally in character, and I think Kira's being a bit ridiculous, thinking that that she can just let Rom go. Because if you look at it logically, they are actually, Rom and Kira and all them are trying to sabotage and undermine the Dominion. So from the Dominion's perspective, they're kind of in the right here to at the very least not let him go, but execute him. Again, it's in line with Dominion's character. And so Kira also gets Ziyal to try to go to her father, Gul Dukat, and try to beg him to let Rom go, and that also fails, which of course it does. Again, I think Kira's being obtuse by trying that route, because all it's doing is straining the relationship between Ziyal and her father, which I think it does make a lot of sense, because at first when Ziyal asked him to show leniency to Rom, his response is to be like, Ziyal, you're not involved in this, are you? If you're involved, you need to tell me right away so I can protect you. And she's like, no, I'm not involved, but what the fuck are you, you're a liar. You said that you wanted to help the Bajoran people and all this stuff, and he's like, oh, no, I do mean that, I just can't let Rom go. So Ziyal is actually starting to see Gul Dukat's true colors, which is actually kind of a good thing that did happen, because she's starting to see him as the evil, egotistical, mass-murdering dictator that he is, which is good, but it's always not a good thing to find out that your father is an evil, mass-murdering dictator. So it's good character interactions between the two of them, even though I do think that Kira is being a little obtuse here. But I also, speaking of Kira, I love the scenes that we get with her with Damar. Damar is an interesting character because he was really fleshed out in this 7-episode story arc, because before he was just a minor little side character who first appeared in, I can't remember the name of the episode, but way back in season 4 when Dukat first went to the freighter, Damar was basically just his lieutenant going around saying, yes, sir, okay, sir, do this, sir. And then he appeared again when Dukat appeared again in the season 5 premiere, and he had a little bit more to do because he was seen more as Dukat's right-hand man, and he was making a lot of smart-ass, snarky comments about Cisco and stuff. So that really had a lot to draw him out. And in the story arc, we really delve into his character. We meet him more because, he is still Dukat's right-hand man, but Dukat's now the leader of the Cardassian people, so that makes Damar in a lot higher position as well, rather than being the right-hand man of a disgraced captain who got, singled out to a freighter that nobody cares about. He's now the right-hand man to the leader of Cardassia, so that makes him quite powerful as well. But he's still kind of just a lackey, and I love how he has this disdain for Kira, which kind of makes sense because even in this episode, in particular, he does say to Quark, I don't see what Dukat sees in Kira, because he doesn't like her at all, and because the whole thing with Dukat, being in love with Kira, lusting after her, is a bit of a power move, where Damar doesn't really have that sort of thing going on, so he constantly butt heads with Kira. And that was really cool to see in this episode, as Kira's getting a drink at Quark's, and Damar's like, oh, Kira, you have to do the upgrades to the thing, and she's like, okay, I'll get it done. She sits down to drink, and he's like, yes, you will get it done, you'll get it done now. And so when she leaves, he takes her seat, and he sits down and has a drink. And you get that awesome line where Damar is like, that attitude of yours, Major, and it will get you in trouble one day. And she goes right up to his face and says, you have a problem with my attitude, you're welcome to try to change it. That is great. That is so awesome. The character interactions we get between these two characters. And of course, later in the episode, you get Kira actually kicking Damar's ass when Damar tries to force Zial to see her father when she doesn't want to. So as soon as Damar grabs Zial against her will, of course, Kira intercedes and it's like, stop what you're doing. And he's like, stay out of this, Major, it doesn't concern me. And she's like, yeah. Can't remember exactly what he said, but he's like, oh, you're welcome to try to stop me or something. And she was like, oh, I was hoping you'd say that. And she beats the shit out of him. that was absolutely amazing. And it was also shows the kind of wimpy, Damar, as he goes crying to Dukat, I want Kira arrested. And Dukat's like, what? No, if Kira attacked you, that means you did something to Zial. And he's absolutely right. So it's weird that Dukat's actually in the right here. But great scenes. I do love them. Also, you get the aftermath of Rom being, held in the cell, and Quark is saying, "Oh, I'll get you out," and Rom's just like, no, don't bother to get me out, just continue the work. And he has this big speech about how the entire Alpha Quadrant is counting on him, and Quark's just like, well, they're going to be disappointed, which is within Quark's character. But he does still work with Kira to try to free his brother and to try to stop the Dominion from winning the war and destroying the Federation. And then we get this amazing scene, one of my favorite scenes. I absolutely love it, when Quark and Kira are talking about, well, they just found out that the minefield's going to come down in a couple of days, and so they don't know what to do. They can't sabotage them. They said the only thing they can do is get a message to Starfleet to warn them, and they're like, oh, well, I have no idea how to do this. And then all of a sudden, Jake just comes up to him and is like, hey, I'm in a good mood because I'm getting a message to my dad. And he's kind of just taking it nonchalantly, and when Kira asks him, how are you doing that? He's just like, oh, I have my ways. And Kira's just like, come on, Jake, there's no time to fuck around. And so he points over to Morn. I love this. I love that we're getting, Morn was always just a background character. He's starting to be more prominent. They used him more in season 6, but he's still doesn't say a word of dialogue on screen, which because it's all because he's considered an extra and they don't want to pay the actor more. But it's funny how they can do that. They can make his character more central and important to the story, and everyone talks to him. And we get that great scene where he's tying up the present for his mother, and Kira comes over to put her finger on the bow to help him. Him and Quark are just staring down at Morn, and so they use Morn to get the message out to Sisko. And I love how when Admiral Ross asks Sisko, do you trust the source of this message? He's like, yes, I do. I trust him. I've known him for 5 years. Really? Sisko trusts Morn that much? I suppose there's no reason not to trust Morn. He's just the bar fly. He just sits in the bar. And I love how, like, you got a scene earlier too with Quark and Morn where Quark was like telling Morn, it's like, oh, you're always welcome here, blah blah blah. And then he sees Kira, so Quark runs off and he leaves on the glass. He says, oh, it's on the house, but it's an empty glass, and you see Morn just tip it over and look at it. It's like it's on the house but nothing's in it. Love Morn. I'm sorry. I like the use of it. It's very good. And also has to say, in the previous episode, we had the whole thing with Odo, falling for the changeling and becoming, like, at the end of that episode, it almost seemed a bit inconsistent with this episode, because at the end of that episode, after he let Rom get arrested, he didn't care. He's just like, Kira came to him, yelled at him, he's like, yeah, doesn't all you solids seem all small and unimportant? I don't really give a shit about you guys anymore. And this episode, he starts to change his mind, and he is acting more like the Odo we know, but I think he's starting to regret what he did. He's starting to reflect upon it, and most importantly, like, his feelings for Kira is what is the anchor of it, which I don't know how I feel about that story-wise. I think he should be anchored to, like, the people of Deep Space Nine as friends more than just Kira, although I would see that Kira would be the most important aspect of that, the biggest anchor drawing him to loyalty to Starfleet, and that's what he's sort of regretting more than all, because you get a couple scenes with him and the female changeling talking about, and she's talking about how the solids, like, apparently it's implied they had sex, because they show that it has to go to a scene with them sitting on the bed, and she's like, oh, so that's how solids experience intimacy. So apparently they just did it. And again, because I talked about this in other videos, that some people, I think Odo himself in some episodes, refer to, like, the way he links with her as sexual, which I don't think it is. I think you could say it's intimate, but I think it's different than sex, because the changeling's natural state of form, like the natural state of existence, is being in a great link, so where they're all linked together. So does that mean they live their lives in a giant orgy? I mean, if you were going to say when Odo links with the female changeling that they're having sex, then that you would have to extend that analogy to say the Great Link is a giant orgy, which I don't think it is. I think that analogy doesn't work, so I wouldn't say that when Odo links with the female changeling that it's sexual. But in this scene, we see that they did in fact have sex, and in fact, she compares it to the Great Link, saying it's a very pale comparisons of shadow. Oh, I pity the solids, that this is the only thing of what they consider intimacy, which makes a lot of sense. As I said, I think they're actually two totally different things, and she actually doesn't understand the appeal of sex, or what it means for solids to have sex and the type of intimacy, because she's looking at it through the lens of the Great Link, which is a totally different thing. But Odo understands, because she drills him on it. She's like, oh, you've experienced this before and you actually enjoyed it, and that's because Odo lived amongst the solids for so long. He got to see through their perspective, and see life through their eyes, where she is so, like, blocked herself off for her whole entire life from ever like wanting to experience or look through the Solid's perspective, and so that's why she just can't understand him, but Odo can. And that's, I think, the catalyst of how he starts to feel empathy and starts to regret what he did. And she brings up Kira, and she's like, "Oh, you wish that you experienced this with Kira." And I think she hits a sore spot with Odo, and doesn't realize that that actually draws out more of his regret of having betrayed her, and makes him realize more that he loves her. And then later in the episode, we see Odo with the female changeling on the promenade, where she's just like, "Oh, the Solids are all small, whatever. Don't concern yourselves with them. We'll control them. They don't need our pity. They just need us. They need our guidance. In other words, control. We need to conquer them." And Odo's like, "Yeah, but they have their independence. They don't like that." And she's like, "Oh, we'll have to break them of that." And that's when he gets like, "Break them." And I think he's starting to come back to the realization that, because I get this, I think this is really good storytelling, because it shows the allure of how he was isolated from his own home, and he was isolated from his people. Now, he made a decision earlier in the show, like season 3, to not rejoin his people because he wasn't okay with what they were doing, but actually spending time with the female changeling and linking with her has really got him to experience what it means to be a changeling more than he ever had in his life. And that's why it momentarily made him sort of forget about his loyalties to the Solids, made him forget about Kira, and because he was so wrapped up in this new experience of finding himself and finding who he really is. But then, now that euphoria of experiencing that is starting to wear off, and he's starting to realize how fucked up these people actually are in relation to his friends, and he's starting to remember the bond that he has with them, and that's why he's starting to show regret. And this episode does that so well, particularly when you get the scene when he tries to apologize to Kira. She's avoiding him, and he's had to run after her, and he has to corner her, and he's like, "I'm sorry," and Kira just yells at him. It's like, we are way, way past sorry, which was such a good, powerful scene, and it leads up nicely into Sacrifice of Angels, where Odo actually betrays the Solids and goes full on back to helping Kira stop the Dominion. And so the transition was great. Totally by this episode was a great setup for that. So now, let me get into Cisco's plan to retake Deep Space Nine. So this is very exciting, because I've said, when I did my review of season 6 as a whole, I talked about this story arc and how what was going on Deep Space Nine, or Terra Nor as they renamed it, was always more interesting to me than what was going on in the Starfleet storyline with Cisco and Defiant, or Dax on Defiant, as it were, and Cisco at the Starbase with Admiral Ross. And Admiral Ross, I think, is another character who, I think he was introduced in this story arc, and he'll become reoccurring afterwards, and I never really cared for him. He just seemed a generic Admiral guy, and we got a bit too much of him in this story arc, if you ask me. But I think the Cisco and Starfleet side of this storyline was actually just as good as the Deep Space Nine side. This is where I think it was strongest, because we have that devotion of a Cisco laying down the law and having to go for bad. He has to meet with these Starfleet admirals and be like, "Look, we have to retake Deep Space Nine because it's the most important strategic location in the entire war, because if that minefield falls, we lost the war." That's instantly. We get the Dominion gets like double, maybe triple the reinforcements, so we're fucked. I mean, we can barely deal with what they have. If they double, triple of their size, we're done for. So we need to take Deep Space Nine to stop that from happening. Now, I don't want to hammer this home too hard, because I already talked about this a lot in other reviews I did, especially in my season 6 review. But it's a major flaw. That is the one plot hole, huge plot hole, major flaw in this whole story arc, is that they let Deep Space Nine fall in the first place, and that they're not more concerned with it, because it is the most strategically important location, because if it falls, then they lose the war instantly, so nothing else matters. And I think that for the admirals to be like, oh, what about Earth? He's being stupid. Because if a wormhole falls, then Earth will fall anyway. So he's being a dumbass. And I don't particularly buy it for this scene. But again, you know, I don't want to harp on this point because I talked about this enough in other videos. But yeah, that is a major plot hole. And I've seen some people try to make excuses for it. There's no excuse. Please don't try to make... There's no excuse for it. It is a plot hole... a big plot hole, not just a small one, but a huge one, plain and simple. But I just have to overlook that and look at because what they did with the rest of the episode and what the rest of the storyline was so amazing that, you know, I can overlook it and not say the episode sucks. Say it's still amazing, still a great episode, even though it has this giant plot hole. Kind of like the whole Star Wars thing with the the Death Star, how easy it was to destroy the Death Star. You overlook that because even though you harp on that plot hole, although they tried to fix in Rogue One, which is ridiculous. But anyway, but you up until then you would harp on that plot hole a lot because it is a plot hole. It is a giant plot hole. It doesn't really make sense, but it doesn't detract from the fact that Star Wars is an amazing movie. So it's the same thing here, even though this is a huge fucking plot hole, because it makes Starfleet out to be strategic-wise morons, because strategically Deep Space Nine is the single most important location in the entire war, like by far, not just by a little bit, but by far. It like outranks Earth by like a magnitude of like tens, or maybe even hundreds. So for them to let it fall in the first place, let alone even after it fall, not to throw everything they got immediately to try to retake it, is ridiculous. But it's stupid that Sisko had to like fight them on this. And then when they tried to get the Klingons' house, Gowron was also being a fucking moron, which, to be fair, that's kind of more in character with Gowron because he has been betrayed as a moron. But he's being a moron too because he doesn't want Kronos to be vulnerable, which again, Kronos is going to fall anyway if those Dominion reinforcements come to the wormhole, so he's being stupid. But it has a nice little storyline where Worf and Martok have to go to Gowron to beg for him to send reinforcements, which allows for the Deus Ex Machina with the Klingons coming to save the day in the following episode. But the way this storyline played out was actually really great because it had that tension, that flow to it, that really upped the stakes, upped the tension, especially when you see Morn come with the message saying that they actually have less time than they think they had. So Sisko has to go with the fleet, but not wait for a couple other fleets. He'll have to go while his fleet is still small, and he can't wait for the Klingons either. He has to go without them. They've run out of time. That was an amazingly charged scene that worked so well. Now, also in the previous episodes, as I said, like Dax, they made Dax the captain of Defiant because Sisko got promoted to an office job, and that's why he proposed this thing. But of course, part of the mission to retake Deep Space Nine was he was going to captain Defiant, which made total sense. I heard some people complaining about Dax being the captain. Doesn't make sense for a lieutenant science officer to command a warship in the time of war, but I don't care. I mean, does it make sense? Probably not, but I don't want them to bring in a new character, and especially since it was it was only for a short time. It makes more sense to have a character we're already more familiar with, and Worf is on the Klingon ship, although maybe it wouldn't make sense to bring Worf back to Defiant so he would be the captain, but whatever, they wanted to keep him on the Klingon ship. Dax was the next logical choice. So I was perfectly okay with that. I actually liked her as captain. I liked seeing her. I thought that was pretty cool. But here she gives up the captain's chair back to Sisko so he can retake Deep Space Nine. So, and we get this nice little scene at the start of the episode too with the characters of Defiant. As I said, like the Defiant storyline was just as good in this episode as the Deep Space Nine storyline, where you have O'Brien, Bashir, and Dax, all them talking about how they're just doing the same thing, tactics over and over again: engage, retreat, engage, retreat, engage, retreat, and it's not working. And I love the banter they have, the interactions, the way they said, like O'Brien's like, "Oh, that's become our favorite tune," and Bashir is like, "Well, we better start a new tune, otherwise we're going to be singing Hail the Conquering Dominion," which was cool. I like the interaction. But then we get this scene with Garrick, which I really liked, because Garrick was being totally in character for Garrick. He's being really paranoid because he's being debriefed by Starfleet intelligence, which he refers to as an interrogation, and O'Brien's like, "Oh, it's not an interrogation, it's a debriefing." He's like, "Well, not from where I'm sitting," which it makes a lot of sense because he was an interrogator and he can recognize one no matter what they call it. And it's funny because in this scene he's very paranoid that Starfleet has implanted a device in his head that can read his thoughts and monitor his thoughts and tell him what he did, and everyone thinks it's the most ridiculous thing ever. Bashir is like, look, I examined you over and over again, there's no such device. And O'Brien's like, you're not going to get anyone to believe that Starfleet intelligence would put a device like that. And he's like, well, that's what I would do. In fact, I've done a lot worse. And they're like, yeah, I'm sure you have, but we're Starfleet, we're a Federation, we're so much better than you Cardassians who are all, you're barbaric and we're cool, we're awesome, we would never do something like that. Now, what's cool about this episode did come out before Section 31 was introduced, but in the canon, in the lore of the Star Trek universe, Section 31 had been around since birth of the Federation. They're just not aware of Section 31, as they shouldn't be. Let's get into Discovery bullshit. But anyway, now how they shouldn't be aware of Section 31. But if you think about it, Section 31 would in fact do something like that. And granted, Section 31 is different. Is different than Starfleet intelligence. Totally autonomous, nothing to do with them. And so Garak was being interrogated by Starfleet intelligence, not Section 31. But here's the thing. We find out later in Season 7 that Odo had a virus implanted him by Section 31 when he was back at Starfleet headquarters talking to Starfleet intelligence. So Section 31 infiltrated him, managed to get him in, managed to infect him with the disease with the intent of killing not only him but his entire race. And the funny thing is if Odo never linked with the changelings, as he did here, then he would have just died and not the other changelings, and Section 31 wouldn't care. They infected him only for the possibility of wiping out the changelings, committing genocide against an entire race of people. And so, if you think about what they did to Odo, the prospect of them implanting a device in Garak's mind that reads his thoughts, not so far-fetched, actually. It does seem like... So it's interesting watching this in retrospect because, as I said when the episode aired, Section 31 hadn't been introduced, so you're sort of agreeing with O'Brien and Dax, like, yeah, that's the most stupidest thing I've ever heard. Starfleet would never do that. We're so much better than you. But in retrospect, knowing what we know about Section 31 and what they're capable of, we find out that perception was actually false, and that O'Brien and Bashir and Dax are being naive. Which is a very interesting thing to think about. I'm not saying that they didn't implant a device like that into Garak's head, but it's a possibility, and I think he's being perfectly reasonable by assuming that that could be the case. You find out that Garak's actually right here. Now, another interesting thing about this episode, another interesting scene we get, is Sisko talking to Admiral Ross, and he talks about how awesome Bajor is, how beautiful Bajor is. He says... He's like, he calls it his home. So Admiral Ross is like, what? So what if Starfleet assigns you somewhere else? He's like, oh, I'll go wherever Starfleet assigns me. But when I go home, it will be to Bajor. Now, this is actually a huge step. This is a huge step in Sisko's personal character, and it will follow through the rest of the series. As we've seen in Season 7, he buys a house on Bajor, and he's talking about retiring there one day and raising a kid there. So, and that possibility is first mentioned here, because before, like in the first couple of seasons, he didn't even want to be on Deep Space Nine. He didn't want to be near Bajor, but he's formed such a close connection to Bajor and the Bajoran people that he now considers it his home more so than Earth. And I like the gradual progression of this, because in Season 3, they talked about how he brought all this stuff home from Earth to Deep Space Nine, so Jake is like, this is now home, because you brought all this stuff that was wherever home is, so now Deep Space Nine is home. But now Sisko is making it clear that he considers Bajor home, and that that's where he wants to spend the rest of his life, which is really cool. It's a really nice touch, and I think really well earned. And it also raises the stakes for them wanting to get back to Bajor to help them to retake DS9. So it also works for the episode really well. Also, I should mention in this episode, Nog gets promoted to full ensign, which kind of comes out of nowhere. Which, I mean, I kind of don't buy and I kind of do. I can see that they kind of get away with this because he was only like in his second year of Starfleet Academy. He was supposed to be on like having field experience or whatever, but he ended up just becoming a normal cast member of Deep Space Nine because they wanted him as a normal cast member. So it makes sense for the show. Hey, let's just make him a full ensign so he can just come on the Defiant full time. And the only reason why, and it's so stupid because he's only his second year through the academy, but the only reason why I partially buy it is because it is wartime, and they are desperate. And in fact, they bring that up. I love how they do bring that up in the episode, because when Nog tells O'Brien that he got promoted, the first thing O'Brien says is, "Well, I didn't realize Starfleet was so desperate." And Nog's response is, "Yeah, scary, isn't it?" So that's great. I love that they acknowledge it. Plus, I love that banter interaction between Nog and O'Brien. It's actually great. It was a cool moment, actually, where you feel like O'Brien is Nog's mentor, where he's like, "Don't let that uniform go to your head. You still have to earn it, and a lot to prove, a lot to learn, but you will." And he was like, "Yes, I'll try to do this proud." So that was a great moment. Even though I don't really like Nog as a character, I did like that moment. I thought that was really good. Anyway, my rating for Favor of the Bold out of 10 is a 9 excellent. Now, I'm very, very close. So close to giving this episode a 10. Because I do think it is that good, it is that amazing. The character interactions were like all spot on. It was so good at building tension for the big finale. But it's hard for me to. The only reason why I didn't give it a 10 is because I don't think this episode stands on its own as much. Like if I include it as part of Sacrifice of Angel, then they both get a 10. But as a standalone episodes, I can't really say this is one of the best episodes of the show because it's not really self-contained. It's more of just feeding into what comes next. But it does that in such a great way, so it was just so close to giving it a 10. Anyway, that is it for my review of Favor the Bold. Now, unfortunately, usually this is a time where I would have a poll where you could determine the next episode. Unfortunately, though, I am going to take a break from doing Star Trek episode reviews. I'm probably about two months, maybe 2 or 3 months around that time, I won't have any more Star Trek episode reviews because I want to focus on getting my Expanse Book to Show videos out. I want to get through season 3 before season 4 starts, so I'm taking a break from the Star Trek episodes so I can focus on that. However, when I come back in a couple of months, hopefully the plan is to come back with a vengeance and do these Star Trek episode reviews a lot more often, hopefully maybe even every week instead of every month as I have been. So that's the plan. Hopefully I can focus more on the Expanse videos first, and then I can focus more on these Star Trek episode reviews. Unfortunately, I'll have to take a couple months break for that, so there will be no poll this time. I will do a poll in advance on that whenever I'm going to start it up again. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, as well as many other videos I do on shows like The Expanse, Game of Thrones, Lost, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.